Hello and welcome to another video from Dazatron's Diorama Llama. So this is another spotlight video, and in particular we're going to look today at these toys here. So these are the Mag Warriors from Mega Bloks, and then we also have on the right hand side we've got these two figures which are from the Rose Art MagnaMan series, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. But while I'm talking about these magnetic figures, I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of do a bit of a timeline on the whole kind of magnetic action figure line and where that kind of came from. So if you've watched any of my videos before, you know I'm a big fan of magnetic action figures. Not necessarily magnetic kind of building blocks, because there's a number of those as well that have gone for or been around for a very long time. So these are figures that use magnetic joints as part of the articulation, and I'm not sure exactly why. I kind of really like these type of figures, but I do like the interchangeable quality, the way you can kind of remove one body part and add a body part from another figure and almost kind of customize your figures. So I started collecting these probably about 3 years ago now, and one of the kind of earliest ones that I found was Steel Jeeg, which is this character at the back here. And he's really important actually in the history of magnetic figures, as he was probably the earliest, certainly the earliest that I can find out. And it does seem to be that Takara were the ones who kind of created this gimmick. And I haven't been able to find any other sources that tell me otherwise. So if you know of any earlier figures than the Takara Magnamo line, which was in the 70s, I'd love to hear about that. So as far as I'm aware, Steel Jeeg, and this is actually a reissue Jeeg, and I've already done a video on this quite a while ago, so do check that out if you're interested. So he was a character created by Go and the Guy as part of the kind of the super robot craze, again back in the early 70s. So shows like Mazinger Z, Gakeen, all sorts really. There's numerous super robot shows out there, and all of them really, or certainly the majority of them, had a toy line to go with them. So Gona Guy had worked with Takara on a number of occasions, and this was one of his earliest collaborations, and one of my kind of favorite designs. I think it's just such a unique design. So this was a reissue in 1999, and but before that, and I think the earliest one that I have is this small Jeeg here. Now I'm not exactly sure of the date on this because I can't quite read. It's kind of rubbed off, so this would probably give me the date, but I can't read that anymore. But I know that the Steel Jeeg series was in 1975 and 1976. So the anime was about 1975, but the toy line seemed to be a year later. And so we have these smaller versions and the larger versions that we've just seen. So even though that's a reissue, the clear version, it uses the same mold, whereas this one has the smaller kind of ball joints. So these were called Magnamo 8 and Magnamo 11. And so the number was really about the size of the ball joint in millimeters. So you had an 8mm joint and you had an 11mm joint. So the larger one you've just seen was the 11mm, and then we had these smaller versions. And so they often did create just smaller scale versions of their bigger characters. I think they were like a cheaper model, so that, you know, fans of the show could pick up a cheaper, smaller version, or they could go for the larger, more deluxe versions. Around the same time, so really kind of 76 up until I think it's about 78, you had a number of these shows, and all of them had these toy lines that used this magnetic kind of gimmick, and they were part of the Magna Robo line. So we had, as I said, Steel Jeeg in 1975 to 76. We had Go Whopper, which was in 1976 also. We had Gakeen, which was also in 1976, going through to 1977. And we had Ball Attack, which was in 1977, going up to 1978. And so, from the popularity of this series and this line, this kind of ran alongside their MagnaMan line. So, MagnaMan, again, I've already produced videos on these talking about this line, and this is, I suppose, a replica of the MagnaMan figures. So this is actually from the Micronauts line, which used the same molds. So this is a time traveler. But essentially the MagnaMan line looked very much like this. Very small scale, 4-inch figures. Really good articulation. Now these didn't use the magnetic joints. However, Takara did release what were called MagnaMan Titans. And so they were small scale figures, a little bit like these actually at the back here, which I'll show in a moment. And they had the magnetic ball joints. So the MagnaMan Titans, they were also around about kind of the, I suppose, the late 70s. But in conjunction with the MagnaMan line, which is running alongside the Magna Robo line, we had this kind of in-between kind of character. It didn't really seem to belong to the Magna Robo line. It didn't really seem to belong to Micronauts. And that's where we saw this character here. Now again, this is not an original. This was a reissue that came out many years later by a company called Palisades. But the character here was based on an early character called Death Cross, and he was renamed Red Falcon many years later. So Death Cross, the original colours, he had more of a kind of a blue skin, but he still had this kind of see-through, kind of almost kind of cybernetic kind of chest there. Used the magnetic joints that we saw from the Magna Robo line. But this was more like a tokusatsu kind of series. So tokusatsu, apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly, are the kind of live action shows, a bit like Ultraman, Power Rangers, kind of Super Sentai shows, where they had basically actors in bodysuits. So kind of think Godzilla as well, things like that. And so Death Cross, although he didn't get his own show, they did actually produce this really cool advert of Death Cross versus this kind of, I suppose, almost like a Godzilla type dragon kind of creature, which was called Machine Sora. So Machine Sora was based on a manga also by Go Nagai, who also designed Steel Jeeg. So this was another collaboration with Go Nagai. I'm not sure if he designed Death Cross, but as I said, he definitely designed Machine Sora, as there was a manga tie-in with that. So there wasn't a show, as far as I'm aware. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong on that. But they then reused that character a number of times, or should I say other companies reused that character a number of times. I haven't got a Machine Sora. It's a highly sought after magnetic figure, and uses the same kind of techniques, but as I said, it's this kind of dragon kind of creature, like a kaiju, and is amazing. It looks really, really cool. They did a green version, and if I got this right, the green version was part of that original kind of line, which is kind of almost that in between Magna Robo and the kind of MicroMan lines. And then they did do a redeco of the same mold, which is in blue, and that was part of their Diaclone line. So Diaclone was another series of toys which again had this kind of interchangeable quality. You could kind of remove pieces and build up kind of vehicles and robots and things like that, and they would go on to inspire or be used in the Transformers line. And as you know, Microman led to Micro Change, and that also formed, if you like, the basis of what would be Transformers in the future. So another interesting feature about the Death Cross character and Machine Sora was Takara introduced this idea of not revealing who the villain was or the hero was. So it was up to the kind of the child's imagination to decide if this kind of lizard-like creature was the bad guy or if actually that was the good guy. And this character who would later become Red Falcon, Death Cross, if he actually was the villain of the piece. So that was quite a nice idea, which I haven't seen used before. But then around about that same time, so 1976, early on actually in this kind of story of these kind of magnetic action figures, a company called Mego had a good relationship with Japan, and they saw some of these toys and saw the potential for them in the West. And so science fiction was really popular, particularly with Star Wars. But again, there are sources out there that suggest that Micronauts actually predates Star Wars. And in fact, Mego was so successful with this line, they were actually the top selling toy until Star Wars came along. And there's even stories that Mego turned down the rights to make the Star Wars figures, but there's certainly videos out there that would explain that in more detail than I can. So you can see here, Mego took the original kind of figure, which is Jeeg, and you can see the bodies there are pretty much identical. In fact, yeah, arms, legs, the only really difference is the head sculpt. And actually, this figure also had these kind of missile attachments well, and the gimmick where you can shoot the hands or the fists. So they pretty much took the exact same toy, but created a new character with it. And I think that's one of the nice things about this toy range, is that there are quite a number of similar releases or just kind of redecos of the same toy, but new head sculpt, new colour scheme, and instantly you've got a new character. And so Baron Karza became this kind of the villain of the piece. And really cool character. There are a couple of slightly different head sculpts. There's the Japanese version and there's a Hong Kong version as well. I'm not sure which one this is, so if somebody in the comments knows, that'd be great if you could let me know that. And they also released Force Commander, which is this one here. And I've got Force Commander here on his horse, which I think is Pegasus, if I don't know if I got that name right, actually. And this was based on Panzeroid, so Steel Jeeg, who you saw earlier, he also had a white horse, but I think it had like a different colour kind of plate here and tail, and it was called Panzeroid. So they also took the kind of steed idea. And what's lovely about that is inside this here, you've got these kind of two joints. I don't think these are actually metallic. Obviously, they're metal. So then you can fit the magnetic joints on the torso to the horse's body. And then you've got these kind of centaur kind of characters, which I think as a child, even now, I just think they look fantastic. So again, exactly the same mold. All the same kind of weapons. There's no kind of differences in the weapons. All those attachments were the same. Just again, a different colour scheme. And Mego ran with this idea. They created lots of vehicles. They also used some of the older vehicles from the MicroMan line. So they took part of these kind of Magna Robo line and joined them with the MicroMan line, and took some of the vehicles from that as well. And as I said, created new additions, which was nice. It was nice to see Mego kind of doing their own take on this line. And Micronauts were, as I said, incredibly popular. They even kind of spawned a tie-in comic from Marvel. And again, and there's some great videos on YouTube that kind of tell the story of that, which is really interesting. If you're ever into the Micronauts and you want to know a bit more about that, I would certainly suggest checking some of those videos out, because it's an interesting story to see how all of that came about. And Mego really took this, I suppose, gimmick and just kind of took it into loads of different places. So they even created a toy line for very young children, I suppose preschoolers, and that was their, I've got to pronounce this right, MagnaNimals. Yeah, that's it, MagnaNimals. Okay, and these were kind of wooden block toys that use the magnetic joint gimmick. So you kind of create your own kind of zoo line, but you could also swap a tiger's head for a giraffe's head and so on, and have lots of fun with that kind of gimmick. And that was also in the early 70s, well, mid 70s. So 1977, I think the MagnaNimals, that's it. And again, around the same time, I think it was 1979 actually, so it was a few years later after Micronauts. Mego, the same company, used the same gimmick but with superheroes. So superheroes are really popular, and they created a kind of a die-cast toy line, so where the figures were all kind of metal, and I do like die-cast toys. But this series, which is Magna Heroes, used the same magnetic joints from the Micronauts line. They did have the addition of the cape, which is quite nice. So on Batman and Superman, we had the cape. And then we also had a Spider-Man version and a Incredible Hulk version. So they were kind of the four key players at the time in comics. Obviously, we've got DC and Marvel represented there. But interestingly, these were only released in Italy. And I think part of the reason for that is that the success of the line with kind of Star Wars coming out had started to dwindle. So Micronauts weren't quite so popular in the US, but in Italy and Europe, they were still insanely popular and still are today. So they Magna Heroes only had a release in Italy, and again, did really well. And the Micronauts line continued over there. So a company called Gig was distributing them in Europe and Italy. I think some of them managed to come over into the UK, and they were called Micronauti. And so we got pretty much the same characters, the same vehicles, the same kind of time travelers, which again, as I showed you earlier, were the characters from the MicroMan line from Takara in Japan. And they added new characters as well. So we had the Emperor, we had a red version of the kind of the originals there, whose name actually has gone out of my head. And we also had Green Baron, which is essentially a green version. And again, all slightly different head sculpts. They all came with a steed as well. So they all had these kind of horse-like kind of creatures. And again, very, very popular. I think they had slightly different weapons. So the Emperor, I haven't got one of those, but I'm sure he came with a sword. And they also reused the Death Cross figure. So this figure here that I showed you, they released him as Red Falcon, using the original colours actually from the Death Cross line. So he was still had a blue face. This is a redeco some years later. So Red Falcon, I think, is one of my favourites. I just love the design of that character. And I'd love to know if it was Go Nagai actually who designed that. As I said, I know he designed Machine Sora. So we got Gig there, we got Mego working together. They're still doing well. They're still kind of releasing these figures. And Gig took a slightly different route as well. So Masters of the Universe was really popular at the time. And so they then, using the same magnetic gimmick, took that idea, but kind of combined it with, I suppose, a Masters of the Universe style figure. Again, unfortunately, I don't own any of those at the moment. Hopefully I will at some point. But again, on the secondary market, they are extremely expensive. So you had this kind of He-Man type character with his weapons. So actually a different body sculpt, which was nice. And I suppose the Magna heroes also have a different body sculpt, which is nice to see. So they're not all exactly the same. And what was interesting about the Fantanaughty line was that they didn't just repeat the, I suppose, the horse kind of idea. I think one of the characters did have a kind of a, I think it's like a kind of grey or silver version of the horse. But they also did this kind of, again, lizard creature, which is amazing. Really, really cool design that I think it was the villain actually that could attach to. So again, really nice to see the way they were kind of taking those ideas. And that was in 1984 that Fantanaughty was released. So that also coincides with the, I suppose, the downfall or the bankruptcy of Mego. And so a company called Palisades decided to take some of the molds from Takara, or wanted to anyway, and some of the molds from Mego to re-release some of these kind of characters under the Micronauts name, but doing some redecos, doing some variations of that. And so that's where we get the Red Falcon that I own. So this is a Palisades version. And unfortunately for Palisades, it was also their downfall. Whether you want to call that the curse of Micronauts, I don't know. But unfortunately, they used a kind of a factory in Japan, or I think it might have been China actually, to make these figures. And interestingly, Takara didn't want anything to do with this kind of venture from Palisades. So Palisades actually had to seek out molds from the fans. And of course the fans were willing because they wanted to see their kind of beloved Micronauts line come back and I suppose, you know, get the limelight again, or maybe get some new kind of characters in there. So, you know, they did kind of hand over some of their cherished toys so they could kind of make new molds from them. But unfortunately, they used I suppose, a cheaper process. And so the first wave that came out, it was kind of fraught with all sorts of problems, with kind of parts falling apart. Yeah, all sorts of QC issues. And that kind of gave them a bit of a bad rap, I suppose, amongst the kind of the community or the fan community. And so they did continue to make them. And actually, this is a 1.5, if I remember right. It wasn't quite wave 1. So they did try and correct the mistake. They did go to a different factory. And so some of the later releases were much better quality. But they did use a lot of clear plastic as well. And kind of back in the early 80s and 70s, clear plastic was kind of known for its kind of brittle kind of quality. I know some of the old Transformers have also suffered with this issue. But as I said, some of the later releases from Palisades still hold up reasonably well. But there's lots of characters out there that didn't do so well. So I only have a couple of theirs. I do have one of the Alien figures. I think it's a Membros. Who's still in his packaging because I haven't tried to open it. Because again, it's a clear version. And it's one of the early waves. And I've heard lots of horror stories. So he's kind of left in his packaging. But actually, this one here, he has held up well. He's even fallen over. And there's no cracks, no problems. So, and I love this deco. I love the red face and the clear plastic. I'm a bit of a sucker for clear plastic as well. So Palisades did try and continue the line. but unfortunately the amount of money they had to put in to get it going, they wasn't able to recuperate, and so Palisades also went bankrupt. Similarly, we had other toy lines that tried to kind of reuse some of the characters. So we had Lords of Light, which is by Pack Toys. That was also in 1984, and I don't think they used any of the magnetic figures. They used some of the other MagnaMan figures. And you also had, I think it was Our Toys and always M&D Toys, did the second season or second wave, and they were called interchangeables because of that kind of interchangeable kind of gimmick. And so they also re-released some of the figures, and they did take the Emperor design that Gig had released in Italy, and which uses again the same gimmick. So I suppose that was a continuation, if you like, as part of the interchangeables. But again, both Lords of Light, which is an incredibly difficult line of toys to collect, very, very expensive, and the interchangeable series, they were cheaper, they use cheaper kind of materials, and they don't always last as well as some of these kind of original toys. But even though these other toy lines were starting to see the potential of this in the 70s and the 80s, and so, you know, they ran with this for a good decade. Takara was also still using these ideas within their own line. So as I said, we had early on the Magna Robo. We also had the MagnaMan Titans, which were smaller scale figures, so more kind of like the 4-inch figures. But then in 1999, and this was kind of a long period, I think it's about a good 10-year period, maybe more, between the original MagnaMan line when that ended, and this kind of return, if you like, to MagnaMan in the late 90s. So yeah, 1999, Takara relaunches the MagnaMan brand, and as part of that, they took that gimmick. And I love these. These are some of my kind of favourite toys to use this gimmick. And again, I suppose quite similar to kind of MagnaMan with their kind of body parts, but I just love the details in these. These have kind of armour that kind of pops off. That's probably the one downside with these. The armour does tend to want to just kind of pop off. It doesn't always kind of stick on that well. But he also introduced this kind of waist joint here. So again, using the magnetic ball, and that really does add a huge amount of extra articulation, because that's really one of the things I suppose the early toy line suffered with. They didn't really have any kind of waist articulation, so adding that bit in makes a massive difference. And these, because the kind of magnets are so strong, these really kind of hold the weight, whereas some of the bigger toys that have been released, they sometimes suffer from the magnets not always holding up the weight of the toys. So these were Magna Force, and I managed to get a few of them. Let's see if I can just show you some close-ups of these. Again, quite unique designs, very sci-fi. Again, all of them have that interchangeable quality. They've got these all new kind of weapons. We've got kind of mixtures of different kind of materials. I love the way kind of Takara uses kind of chrome and see-through plastic, and just really kind of these kind of bright poppy colours, which we don't always see in kind of sci-fi in the West. So even the Micronauts line, they haven't always got those kind of really bright kind of colours. And then we've got this one here. So he's got his weapon. I suppose he's got a bit more of like a human face there. And these have also got the magnetic kind of plate on the sole of the feet, so you can kind of attach them to vehicles and things like that, or yeah, you know, stick them on your fridge, I suppose. They used that idea on some other MagnaMan toys, which didn't use the magnetic ball gimmick, but did use the magnetic soles. So this character here, he was also part of the relaunch. Much smaller in scale, this one. In fact, if I bring a time traveler, which was the early MagnaMan, you can see the difference in size there. And this also had an anime to go with it. So Takara were really, you know, trying to, I suppose, get this line going again, you know, which is great. But unfortunately, these smaller ones, they, as I said, they don't use the magnetic feature. So yeah, so we've got MagnaForce there, 1999. Same time, I suppose, again, trying to, I suppose, jump on the kind of nostalgia bandwagon, really. They reissued the Jeeg figure, which I suppose was the figure that was responsible for this kind of gimmick. And they released this in its original colours. So this is exactly the same mould. They released this clear version, which I love, which is this one here. And they also released a kind of a black and, I suppose, kind of a black and silver version, which again, I would love to get hold of, because Jeeg is probably my favourite of the characters. So around the same time, they also released some other kind of, I suppose, creatures that used the magnetic gimmick. So we've got these cougars here. So again, part of the MagnaMan line. I've got a time traveler on there from the Micronauts. But again, if I pull off the leg there, you can see they've taken the same idea. And there's quite a few different variations. There's some more robots. They're using that gimmick. There's some really weird kind of, I think they're kind of like pullback kind of vehicles. One's like a frog, and I think another one might be like a beetle or something like that, which is really cool. But I don't own those. So I've got the two cougars here, which came in a set. So again, you can kind of swap them out. Slightly different head sculpts, which is quite nice. But they're great. But I think my favourite from, I suppose, the late 90s is this one here. This is just such a magnificent toy. And this is called Hurricane Bird. And I absolutely love this. Again, same gimmick. You've got the magnetic kind of balls there. This one's slightly different in that it doesn't have an actual magnetic joint in there. So the ball just kind of fits into this socket, which I suppose does give it a bit of strength, because you've got these little kind of parts that come out of here. So it's almost kind of like a ratchet joint. So it gives a little bit more kind of friction there, and just, I suppose, holds the weight a bit easier. Because again, like I said earlier, that is, I suppose, one of the problems with this gimmick is that they don't always hold the weight. Sometimes the magnetic balls just kind of slide around. So we've got these huge wings here. We've got these claws. It's got a mouth that kind of opens and shuts. And again, the beauty of this line is that there was also this kind of large robot that you could buy. And so you could kind of take part of this. You could give the robot these kind of wings. They also released a kind of, I suppose, the villain, if you like, version of that, which I do own actually. That's up in the loft, unfortunately stored away somewhere just because of display space. And that was like a crocodile. You had this kind of vampire kind of bat. In fact, I've got an earlier video where I do talk about that and I showcase that. So yeah, do look out for that. And again, the same idea, and you could just kind of mix and match all of these things and kind of create these really kind of fantastic kind of creatures or hybrids. And I think that's probably why I love them so much, is I just love the way you can kind of, or the playability, if you like, nature of these toys. So there's a bit of a, I suppose, a history, if you like, that kind of takes us up to the 2000s. And so in 2005, Mega Bloks took this idea. Now, I'm assuming they didn't have to, I don't know if they had to kind of patent it in some way. I don't know exactly what the difference is with these kind of characters. Obviously, they're much smaller. They're a little bit bigger than the kind of Micronaut reissues. Let me just grab one. The nice thing about these is that they kind of, I suppose, took that idea of, I suppose, kind of like Pokemon and kind of card games where, you know, you've got like the different kind of statistics. And so these kind of metal kind of bases here, also they're kind of they're kind of, I'm trying to think what the word is, you know, it tells you kind of what strength they have and stuff like that. So if you wanted to do a battle with your mates, it was also collecting these, and a lot of it was really popular, wasn't it? Even when I was younger, kind of doing swapsies and, you know, kind of playing games and stuff like that. So they kind of really kind of took that idea to another level, and I really like these. So you've got this magnetic stand, so we've got the magnetic feet, but Mega Bloks really went with the idea of the, I suppose, the knights, if you like, of the round table, or kind of medieval knights, but very kind of similar. We've got these metal kind of stumps here, and then we've got metal kind of parts or magnetic parts inside the arms, which then again link on. So it gives you lots and lots of articulation. You've kind of got the elbow joint there and knee joints, and then we've got a kind of a host of weapons as well. And they also added a an LED feature, so you've got kind of light up action as well. That one doesn't work, but let me see if I can find one that does. There we go. So this one's particularly nice because it's got almost like a translucent quality. And if I press the head here, button on the head, you can see his eyes light up, which is really cool. And again, all the weapons, all the different body parts, you can change out or swap out with the other characters. Let's bring this one. So we've got his name on the back. Yeah, so Drachnid is this one. Again, love this kind of almost like dragon armor, the spikes. Does his... yeah, his gimmick isn't working. Managed to pick these up on eBay as a set, which is quite nice recently. I think this one does work. There we go. So he's just got the one eye there. I don't know if he's meant to have both eyes light up, but I actually quite like just the one eye lighting up. And what was nice about the Mag Warriors line is they introduced again some steeds. So you had another kind of horse, and you had this other kind of just, it's kind of very unique design, and I can't even describe it really, just this kind of creature. So they came with this kind of leaflet here, which shows some of the other characters in the wave. I think they actually managed to produce at least 2 waves of this. They might have done a few. Yes, this one's 2006, and they came, which again, nice little touch, in these kind of plastic cases, which is nice. So just easy to kind of store the character, especially as all the parts come undone. So a nice easy way to kind of keep your characters safe and display them, which is good. And you've just got the insert there, and you also, yeah, you can see just on the back there, you got something called the Dark Portal, which is almost like a diorama piece. And I think you could kind of hang the character to the doorway, so it looks like they're kind of going inside this portal, which I think is a really cool idea. But again, very similar gimmick to what we've seen already from Mego and Takara. And of course, I suppose even if you look at the original Mego ones there, they've almost got this kind of night kind of theme going, as opposed to these kind of super robots that we see from Takara. So you can just see the difference, can't you, in what was popular in the West and what was popular in Japan. And so then, actually around about the same time, so I thought originally these were much later than the Mag Warriors, but it seems to be they were at a similar time. So again, around 2005, 2006. And these were released by Rose Art, and they're called Rose Art MagnaMan. Now, Rose Art had created some magnetic construction blocks called magnetics. And interestingly, which I found out doing the research for this video, Mega Bloks ended up buying out Rose Art. So I don't know if that's the reason why they're using the same gimmick. I don't know, or if these were released first and then Mega Bloks kind of purchased Rose Art, I'm not sure. But what's interesting about these, and I've only got 2 of the characters from the line, is I actually find these a bit more creative than the Mag Warriors, which uses the, I suppose, the medieval knight gimmick. I think there's a bit more creativity here. So they're much bigger in scale. In fact, let me just grab one of the Mag Warriors, so you can see the difference in height there. So they're much bigger. They've also got a host of weapons, lots of kind of translucent materials. Similar kind of use of the gimmick. So again, we've got the kind of magnets encased this time inside the arms, which seems to be the difference with the later action figures that use this idea. We've also here got magnetic knee joints. So that is something we don't see on the earlier models from Mego and Takara. They had different knee joints and elbow joints. It was only on the shoulders and kind of the hips that they used the magnetic ball. So this has gone a little bit further here by introducing these kind of magnetic knee joints and also magnetic elbow joints. So that's quite a nice touch. Now, unfortunately, Rose Art, and I don't think it was actually from their MagnaMan line. It seemed to be from their Magnetics line. They had thousands of complaints where children had swallowed some of the magnets. And in fact, one child actually died from swallowing a magnet because it can kind of, I think, perforate the stomach. And so I suppose it would have been actually Mega Bloks who had to recall all of their kind of magnetics lines. So even the construction kits, as well as the kind of the MagnaMan line were recalled. And so I don't know how many of these got out there. I have seen some others in the line for sale, again on eBay. There's an alien one which is quite cool, which is again kind of translucent green. They also do a kind of a night version as well. And so I don't think they were actually given a full release, which again is a shame because they're a really cool figure and they feel actually really kind of durable and sturdy. And considering we've got these extra magnetic joints on the knees, they do hold up really well. So we've also got this figure here. I don't know the names of these. So again, we've got this kind of torso joint. Just really cool designs. And the plastic actually feels a bit more rubbery on here, where the plastic on the original figures from Mego and Takara is a much kind of harder, kind of shinier plastic. This has got a bit more of a kind of a softer feel to it. And I don't know whether that was just to kind of make them a bit safer, particularly when you've got kind of things like spikes and stuff like that. So we've got this kind of knee joint here. Now this one here, again, takes almost this kind of ratchet joint idea that we saw with the MagnaMan kind of cougar and hurricane bird figures. So we've got these kind of almost like kind of cogs. So it just helps the legs stay in place. Otherwise, I don't think that would hold. I think he would just kind of flop under the weight. And that is, again, the issue with the larger figures that Takara created. And if you watch my video, earlier video of this kind of monster creature I was talking about, it just kind of flops all over the place. So at least Rose Art and Mega Bloks managed to solve that problem with the way they constructed these. This one's got a nice addition of a tail. There's no magnetic joint on the tail, just kind of a little ball joint. And the tail doesn't, it bends a little bit just because it's a rubbery material, but there's no kind of wire in that to bend it. And there we go, we can remove that. So those are the MagnaMan characters from Rose Art and the Mag Warriors characters from Mega Bloks. So I hope you've enjoyed just kind of going through that bit of a timeline of these kind of magnetic figures. And it'd be interesting, as this company had to recall, as I said, these magnetic toys, whether that idea will continue. But interestingly, in 2015, a man by the name of Bo Hacking did a kind of a what's it called, a Kickstarter type campaign to release his own version of this gimmick, which was called Morphonauts. And what was interesting about the Morphonauts, again, original designs, very kind of sci-fi orientated. But he must have had a slightly different gimmick. I don't own a Morphonaut again. I'd love to own one of them at least. Because from an interview I saw with him recently with Brick Something on his channel, he was talking about how he had to kind of patent his kind of magnetic joint idea. So it'd be interesting to see what actually the difference is between the early versions and the later versions and the Morphonauts. But what was interesting about his kind of, and I don't know if it was a Kickstarter or a different company, is the customization kind of gimmick that he used. The whole idea that you could kind of swap parts out. You could design your own because they were 3D printed. So if you had your own kind of character idea, you could get that designed, which I thought that was a brilliant thing to add on to that idea. And also they tied it in with a kind of a board game, and I'm a big fan of board games. So I missed it. I didn't know about this back in 2015. Otherwise, I think I certainly would have backed one of those. And he's gone on to make some other action figures now. In fact, if you're interested in this kind of an interview with Bo Hacking, I would certainly suggest going onto the Brick Something channel. I'll see if I can find a link actually to one of his news videos where Bo Hacking is one of the guests, and they kind of talk about some of the things that have been released at the moment. And Bo talks about some of the things that he's got going on at the moment, some of his action figures that he's trying to get out there. And he talks briefly about Morphonauts, and how interestingly they are not tied to Micronauts, even though they've got a similar name and a similar gimmick, which I was kind of fascinated by. So even in 2015, we've still got these magnetic figures being released. So now we're in 2024. I wonder if we'll get any more. So yeah, keep a watch out, keep an eye out. And if you've got any memories of any of these lines, I'd love to hear from you. So please do leave a comment and a like. And yeah, maybe you want to jump on the Dennis rabbit hole with me, you know, and start collecting some of these wonderful figures from the past. Right, nice chatting to you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.